Hey guys, tonight we slip into the humid, vibrant streets of 16th century Benin, where the air hums with the clink of hammers and the faint hiss of sacred pythons slithering in the shadows. You're standing in the heart of the kingdom of Benin, modern-day Nigeria, where bronze casters craft shimmering plaques that tell stories of kings, spirits, and snakes. The workshops glow with firelight, and the ground vibrates from molten metal being poured. These artisans aren't just making art, they're weaving the soul of a kingdom into every piece. Fair warning, you probably wouldn't survive a day in their sweltering forges with no AC and snakes as your co-workers. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Drop a comment with your city and local time. I'm curious where you're drifting off from tonight. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You step into a dusty courtyard in Benin's capital, where the Bronze Casters Guild operates under the watchful eyes of the Oba, the Divine King. The air smells of charcoal and melted wax, and your sandals crunch on clay shards scattered across the ground. Around you, artisans' men with calloused hands and sweat-soaked wrappers hunch over molds, their faces lit by the orange glow of a furnace. These aren't just craftsmen, they're keepers of a sacred tradition, blending skill with spirituality. The Kingdom of Benin, at its peak from the 13th to 17th centuries, was a powerhouse in West Africa, famed for its intricate bronze plaques and sculptures. Historians note that these works, often depicting warriors or court scenes, adorned the Oba's palace, showcasing wealth and power. But here's the quirky bit every caster had to honor pythons believed to be messengers of Olokun the sea god. Snakes weren't just pets, they were divine co-workers, often curling up near the forges. You notice the guild's strict rules. Only certain families chosen by lineage can join, and they guard their craft like a secret recipe for the world's best jollof rice. Imagine trying to sneak in as an apprentice. You'd be out faster than a tourist, haggling too hard at the market. The casters use the lost wax technique, a method where wax models are coated in clay, heated to melt the wax, and then filled with molten bronze. It's slow, meticulous, and hotter than a Lagos traffic jam. Historians still argue whether Benin's bronze casting tradition evolved independently or was influenced by nearby Ife artisans whose own sculptures predate Benin's by a century. Either way, you're surrounded by a craft that's as much about devotion as it is about art. A python slithers past your foot, and you freeze. Don't worry, it's just saying hi, probably. The casters chuckle at your wide eyes, their hands never pausing as they pour liquid fire into molds. You're in their world now, where every plaque tells a story, and every snake is a sacred guest. Your attention shifts to a peculiar presence, pythons. These aren't just any snakes gliding through the dust. They're sacred, revered as divine emissaries in the kingdom of Benin. You crouch near a clay shrine in the corner of the workshop, where a sleek python coils lazily, its scales glinting like the bronze cooling nearby. The casters treat it with the respect you'd give a visiting elder, tossing it bits of meat and whispering soft words. In Benin's spiritual world, pythons are tied to Olokun, the god of the sea and wealth, and they're believed to carry messages between the human and divine realms. This isn't some quirky superstition. It's a cornerstone of the kingdom's culture, woven into every aspect of life, from casting to court rituals. You notice a caster pausing his work to bow slightly to the snake, and you can't help but smirk. Imagine explaining that to your boss back home. The mainstream historical fact here is that Benin's python worship likely stems from the Edo people's animist beliefs, predating the kingdom's rise in the 13th century. These beliefs blended with royal traditions, making python symbols of protection and prosperity. A fringe tidbit, some oral stories claim pythons could choose the next Oba by slithering onto the chosen heir's lap during ceremonies, talk about a scaly job interview. Historians still argue whether this reverence for snakes came from local traditions or was influenced by Yoruba neighbors who also venerated pythons in their own way. You wander closer to the shrine, where a small clay pot holds offerings of palm wine and cola nuts. The air smells faintly of fermented fruit, mixing with the forge's smoky tang. The casters believe neglecting the pythons could anger Olokun, ruining their bronze work, or worse, bringing drought. You're tempted to pet the snake, bad idea, unless you want a lecture from a priest who's probably watching from the shadows. Instead, you watch a young apprentice sweep the shrine's base, his movements careful, almost reverent. It's a reminder that this workshop isn't just a workplace. It's a sacred space where craft and faith intertwine. A caster nearby jokes, "If the python hisses, your mold's cursed." You laugh, but his eyes say he's half serious. The python flicks its tongue, and you step back, wondering if it's sizing you up, or just saying, "Relax, human, I'm napping." The forge roars on, and you're starting to feel the rhythm of this place, hot, slow, and strangely soothing. You're watching a caster pour liquid fire into a clay mold. Now the process mesmerizing, like a slow dance between heat and skill. You're standing close enough to feel the furnace's glow on your face, but not so close you singe your wrapper. Trust me, you wouldn't survive a day without a few burns here. The casters move with practiced ease, their hands steady despite the chaos of bubbling metal. This is the heart of Benin's bronze casting tradition, where artisans use the lost wax method to create plaques that will hang in the Oba's palace, each one a snapshot of the kingdom's glory. The mainstream historical fact is that Benin's bronze casters, active from the 13th century and onward, perfected a technique where wax figures are sculpted encased in clay and then melted away to make room for molten bronze. It's a grueling process requiring precision and patience, like trying to bake a cake in a volcano. A quirky tidbit: some molds were decorated with tiny snail shells, believed to bring good luck to the casting imagine, explaining that to a modern art teacher. Historians still argue whether the casters learned this technique from the nearby Ife kingdom or developed it independently, a debate as heated as the forges around you. You step closer, dodging a pile of broken clay molds, and watch a caster carve delicate patterns into a wax model. His knife moves like it's got a mind of its own, etching warriors and pythons into the soft surface. The air hums with quiet chants, as if the casters are coaxing the metal to behave. You can't help but grin at the thought of a python slithering by, inspecting the work like a fussy supervisor. One caster catches your eye and winks, saying "too slow," and the bronze bites back. It's a joke, but the scars on his hands suggest there's truth in it. You notice a young boy fanning the furnace with a palm leaf, his face serious, despite the sweat dripping into his eyes. This isn't just art, it's a legacy, each plaque a story of power and faith. The python from earlier curls nearby, unbothered by the heat. You're starting to see why these snakes are so revered. They're as calm as you wish you could be in this fiery chaos. The forge's glow dims slightly as a storyteller takes center stage near the workshop's edge, his voice low and rhythmic, weaving tales of pythons that guard the kingdom's treasures. You lean in the firelight, dancing on his face, as he describes a python that saved an Oba's gold from thieves. The air smells of cooling bronze and damp earth, and you're pulled into the pulse of this place where every story carries divine weight. The casters work on their hammers, clinking, but they're listening too, nodding as the tale unfolds. You smirk, imagine a snake as the kingdom's best security guard. You definitely wouldn't survive a day trying to outsmart one of those. The mainstream historical fact is that pythons in Benin's Edo culture were seen as protectors linked to Olokun the sea god, and often depicted in oral traditions as guardians of sacred spaces from at least the 13th century. A quirky tidbit. Some tales claim pythons could speak to priests in dreams, guiding them to hidden water sources during droughts. Try pitching that to a modern zoologist. Historians still argue whether these myths were purely local or borrowed from Yoruba traditions, where snakes also held sacred roles. You shift on the hard ground, your wrapper sticking to your skin, and listen as the storyteller describes a python coiling around a royal treasury, its eyes glowing like embers. The casters murmur agreement as if they've seen it themselves. You glance at the shrine from earlier, remember that python curled up like a scaly donut, and wonder if it's got a side hustle guarding gold. The storyteller chuckles and sings Steal from Olokun, and you'll wake with a python for a blanket. You laugh, but the caster's serious nods make you rethink your amusement. A young apprentice passes you a calabash of palm wine, and you sip the tartness cutting through the smoky air. The story shifts to a python leading a lost prince home, and you're pulled into the rhythm of the tale, the forge's heat fading as the words lull you. It's a world where snakes aren't just animals, they're divine allies woven into every plaque and prayer. You turn your attention back to the casters themselves, their hands moving with a rhythm that feels almost sacred. The air hums with the clink of tools and the faint rustle of a python sliding past a pile of clay molds. You're in the heart of the Bronze Casters Guild, now a tight-knit group bound by secrets and tradition. You wouldn't survive a day trying to crack their code. It's like trying to join a secret club where the password is a perfect bronze pour. The mainstream historical fact is that Benin's bronze casting guilds, flourishing in the 16th century, were exclusive societies restricted to specific Edo families, ensuring their techniques remained closely guarded. Only those born into the right lineage could touch the wax or stoke the fires. A quirky tidbit, apprentices had to swear oaths under a python's gaze, promising never to spill the guild's secrets. Imagine a snake as your HR manager. Historians still argue whether these oaths were purely symbolic or enforced with real punishments like exile or worse. You watch a master caster, his face weathered like old leather, guide an apprentice through carving a wax model. His voice is low, almost a whisper, as he corrects the boy's shaky cuts. The guild's rules are strict. No outsider can learn the craft, and every step from mixing clay to chanting prayers is ritualized. You notice a small altar nearby, piled with kola nuts and feathers, where casters offer thanks to Olokun before each pour. It smells faintly of incense cutting through the forge's smoky haze. A caster nearby jokes mess up the wax, and the python knows. You chuckle, but his glance at the shrine suggests he's not entirely kidding. You step closer, your sandals crunching on clay dust, and see the apprentice's hands tremble as he etches a python's coils into the wax. This isn't just art, it's a test of loyalty, skill, and faith. The master nods approval, and you feel the weight of their world, every plaque, a secret, every snake, a silent judge. You step away from the workshop's heat, heading toward Waida, a coastal town where the air smells of salt and palm oil, and python temples stand as sacred hubs. You walk a sandy path, the sun dipping low, casting golden streaks across thatched roofs. A python slithers across your trail, and you pause, heart skipping, as it glides into the underbrush. You wouldn't survive a day dodging these revered reptiles without a few jitters, trust me. The temples ahead are small but ornate, their clay walls etched with snake motifs, and you're about to step into a world where pythons are more than just animals, they're divine. The mainstream historical fact is that Oueda, a key spiritual center in the Kingdom of Benin by the 16th century, housed python temples where priests and devotees honored these snakes as links to Olokun drawing worshippers from across the region. A quirky tidbit: some temples kept dozens of pythons, fed daily with offerings of eggs and milk, and locals swore the snakes never bit their caretakers. Try explaining that to a modern vet. Historians still argue whether these temples were primarily religious or also served as political tools, reinforcing the Oba's divine authority. You reach a temple, its entrance framed by woven palm fronds and duck inside. The air is cool, damp, and smells faintly of earth and incense. A priest draped in white cloth tends a python coiled on a low altar, its scales shimmering like polished bronze. You watch him sprinkle water over the snake, murmuring soft chants, and you can't help but smirk. Imagine listing snake babysitter on your resume. The priest catches your eye and says, "They listen better than you do." You laugh, but his calm certainty makes you wonder. The temple walls are lined with clay pots, each holding offerings, and you notice faint carvings of pythons curling around ships, a nod to Olokun's sea domain. Worshippers kneel quietly, their whispers blending with the rustle of snakes. You feel the stillness of this place, a contrast to the forge's chaos, and it's oddly soothing, like the hum of a fan back home. You're standing in the shadow of the Oba's palace now, its walls gleaming with bronze plaques, the air thick with dust and polished metal. You squint at the intricate designs, warriors' kings, and of course, pythons etched into the shimmering surfaces. These plaques aren't just decorations. They're the kingdom's history, its pride nailed up for all to see. You wouldn't survive a day trying to polish one without smudging it and earning a stern glare from a palace guard. The caster's work from that sweaty workshop ends up here, transforming the palace into a living gallery. The mainstream historical fact is that Benin's bronze plaques, crafted between the 13th and 17th centuries, served as historical records depicting royal ceremonies, battles, and spiritual symbols, and were displayed prominently in the Oba's palace to showcase power. A quirky tidbit: some plaques included tiny errors like a warrior with 6 fingers because casters believed perfection invited bad luck from jealous spirits. Historians still argue whether these plaques were purely decorative or also served as propaganda to legitimize the Oba's rule among subjects and visitors. You run your fingers along a plaque's edge, careful not to touch the surface, and marvel at the detail a python curls around a scepter, its eyes carved with uncanny precision. The palace courtyard buzzes, with courtiers in bright wrappers, their chatter mingling with the clink of bronze being cleaned. A nearby guard jokes, "Drop a plaque and you're cleaning snake pens for a month." You chuckle, but his spear suggests he's not entirely kidding. The plaques tell stories of conquests and rituals, each one a snapshot of Benin's glory. You notice one showing a festival with dancers honoring a giant python, probably a cousin of that scaly guest from the workshop. The craftsmanship is breathtaking, each line telling you the casters poured their souls into it. You imagine the Oba himself inspecting these, his nod of approval worth more than gold. The sun beats down, but the plaque's shine keeps you rooted lost in a world where art, faith, and power intertwine. A procession winds through the palace gates, the air carrying the scent of crushed herbs and palm oil, and you hear the soft beat of drums as the oba appears draped in coral beads and flanked by priests. At his side, a massive python, bigger than that workshop snake, slithers across the ground, its scales catching the light like liquid bronze. You freeze heart thumping. You definitely wouldn't survive a day as a royal snake handler. This is no ordinary ceremony. It's a ritual honoring the sacred pythons, tying the king's power to the divine. The mainstream historical fact is that in the kingdom of Benin, by the 16th century, the Oba participated in elaborate ceremonies to honor pythons seen as messengers of Olokun, reinforcing his divine right to rule. These rituals were public displays of spiritual and political authority. A quirky tidbit: the Oba sometimes gifted pythons to loyal chiefs, like handing out sacred VIP passes. Imagine getting a snake as a thank you note. Historians still argue whether these ceremonies were primarily religious or strategic moves to unify the kingdom's diverse clans under the Oba's banner. You inch closer, sandals scuffing the packed earth as priests scatter kola nuts and pour libations of palm wine before the python. The crowd hums with quiet reverence, but you catch a priest muttering, "Spill the wine," and the snake picks your fate. You smirk, hoping it's a joke, but his stern glance says otherwise. The Oba raises a staff, its bronze tip carved with a coiled serpent, and speaks in a low, steady voice, praising Olokun's protection. The python, unbothered, glides toward a clay altar, and you swear it's eyeing the offerings like a picky dinner guest. You notice the crowd's calm, almost sleepy demeanor, their murmurs blending with the drum's rhythm. It's a strange mix of awe and routine, like attending a church service where the guests of honor might slither over your feet. The plaques behind you echo this scene, their carvings capturing moments just like this. You're caught in the slow pulse of the ritual, the heat and chants lulling you into Benin's sacred rhythm. You slip away from the royal ceremony, its drum beats echoing faintly, trailing a bronze caster through the city's dusty streets, his wrapper stained with clay and sweat. The air smells of roasted yams and wood smoke, and you dodge a wandering goat as you follow him to his home. This is the daily life of a caster, a world of routine and ritual far from the Oba's grandeur. You wouldn't survive a day juggling his tasks, forge work-family duties, and keeping pythons happy. It's a grind, but there's a quiet rhythm to it, like the hum of a fan lulling you to sleep. The mainstream historical fact is that Benin's bronze casters, thriving in the 16th century, lived structured lives within tight-knit communities, balancing their sacred craft with family obligations and guild rules. Their days revolved around the forge, but also included rituals to honor Olokun. A quirky tidbit: casters often named their children after tools or metals, like bronze or chisel, hoping to pass on their craft's luck. Imagine yelling "Hammer dinner's ready." Historians still argue whether casters enjoyed high social status or were seen as laborers, given their dependence on royal patronage. You reach the caster's compound, a cluster of mud brick huts shaded by palm trees. His wife stirs a pot of a goosey soup, the spicy aroma making your stomach rumble, while children chase a chicken across the yard. The caster kneels at a small shrine, yet there's a python curled there, like the one from the workshop offering a kola nut before heading inside. He jokes, "No offering, no supper. The snake's stricter than my wife." You chuckle, but the kid's serious nods make you rethink it. Inside tools are neatly stacked, and a half-finished wax model sits on a stool, its python motifs glinting in the dim light. The caster's life is relentless mornings at the forge, evenings carving wax, and nights praying for Olukun's favor. You sit on a woven mat, sipping palm wine. He offers its tartness cutting through the dust in your throat. The family's chatter, mixed with the python's faint rustle, wraps you in a soothing rhythm, pulling you deeper into their world. The sun dips low, painting the sky orange, and you're back in the workshop. The air humming with the clink of tools and the faint hiss of a python curled near the shrine. You're watching the casters etch intricate designs into wax models, and your eyes catch on the recurring motif pythons, their coils weaving through every plaque like a sacred thread. These snakes aren't just decoration, they're symbols of power protection and Olukun's divine presence. You wouldn't survive a day trying to carve those curves without a shaky hand ruining the whole thing. The mainstream historical fact is that python imagery dominated Benin's bronze art from the 13th century onward, symbolizing Olokun the sea god and the Oba's divine authority, with their coiled forms appearing on plaques, staffs, and altars. A quirky tidbit: some casters believed a python's shed skin mixed into the wax made their molds stronger. Imagine pitching that to a modern chemist. Historians still argue whether the python motif was purely spiritual or also a political symbol used to unify the kingdom's clans under the Oba's rule. You lean closer, the forge's heat prickling your skin as a caster carves a python's scales with a bone knife, each stroke deliberate. The wax smells faintly of honey, blending with the smoky air. You notice a plaque nearby, its python, curling around a royal figure, eyes glinting like they're alive. A caster catches your stare and smirks. Carve it wrong, and the snake haunts your dreams. You laugh, but his glance at the shrine python makes you wonder. The designs aren't random. Every coil, every scale tells a story of creation or protection, tying the casters to their god. You step back, dodging a pile of clay shards, and watch the team work in sync, their chants soft but steady. It's hypnotic, like the rhythm of a slow fan back home. The python motif feels alive, slithering through the art and into the kingdom's soul, pulling you deeper into its quiet power. Your focus shifts to the tools scattered around you. Bone knives, wooden spatulas, and clay molds that look like they've seen centuries of use. You pick up a bone knife, its edge worn but sharp, and feel its surprising weight. You wouldn't survive a day wielding these without slicing a finger or dropping a mold, trust me. These tools are the unsung heroes of Benin's bronze art, turning raw metal into plaques that dazzle the Oba's palace. The python from earlier snoozes nearby, unbothered by the clatter. The mainstream historical fact is that Benin's bronze casters, peaking in the 16th century, used simple but precise tools in the lost wax process, including bone and wood implements for carving and clay crucibles for melting bronze, a method unchanged for generations. A quirky tidbit: some casters tied python scales to their tools, believing they channeled Olukun's strength into their work. Imagine explaining that to a hardware store clerk. Historians still argue whether these tools were locally innovated or adapted from trade with neighboring cultures like the Yoruba or Ife. A caster nearby chuckles. Drop that, and you're sweeping the forge for a week. You grin, setting it down carefully, and watch him scoop wax with a gourd, his movements as steady as a metronome. The furnace roars its heat, making your wrapper cling to your skin, and you notice a stack of clay molds, each etched with faint python coils. The casters mix their own clay, a recipe guarded like a family secret, and you catch a whiff of damp earth as they pack it around a wax model. Another caster jokes, "Bad clay, bad bronze." Olokun doesn't forgive his tones light, but his eyes flick to the python shrine. The tools, crude as they seem, are extensions of the caster's skill, each one a link to their ancestors. You're lulled by the rhythm of their work scrape pack, pour like a soft hum, pulling you deeper into their world. The furnace's glow intensifies as you watch the casters prepare for a pour, but it's not just about melting bronze. There's a spiritual hum to their work, a quiet chant rising as they circle the furnace, their voices blending with the crackle of fire. Every step from mixing clay to pouring metal is steeped in prayers to Olokun, ensuring the bronze captures more than just a shape, it holds divine essence. You wouldn't survive a day forgetting these rituals. One skipped prayer might curse the whole mold. The mainstream historical fact is that in 16th century Benin, bronze casting was a sacred act, with artisans performing rituals to honor Olokun before and during the process, believing divine favor ensured flawless plaques. These ceremonies were as critical as the technical steps. A quirky tidbit, casters sometimes sprinkled python blood into the furnace, thinking it strengthened the bronze try, pitching that to a modern metallurgist. Historians still argue whether these spiritual practices were purely religious or also a way to maintain guild discipline, keeping apprentices in line. You stand back. As a caster, his face glistening with sweat, offers a palm wine libation to the shrine python. The air smells sharp, like fermented fruit, mixed with molten metal. He chants softly, asking Olokun to guide the pour, and you can't help but smirk. Imagine praying to a snake for a good day at work. Another caster catches your grin and says, "Laugh now," but Olokun sees everything. You chuckle, but his serious nod makes you pause. The team packs a clay mold, and its surface etched with python coils, and you notice their hands move with reverence, like they're sculpting a prayer. The furnace glows brighter, and you feel the heat prickling your skin as the bronze bubbles. A young apprentice fans the flames, his eyes wide with focus. The chant grows softer, almost a whisper, and you're pulled into the slow, sacred rhythm, like a fan's hum back home, easing you deeper into Benin's spiritual craft. You step outside into the cooler evening air. The forge's heat, fading as you follow a narrow path toward a python temple where priests hold sway over the casters' spiritual lives. The stars are peeking out, and you hear the faint rustle of a python sliding through the grass nearby. These priests aren't just holy men. They're the bridge between the casters and Olokun, guiding rituals that keep the bronze sacred. You wouldn't survive a day messing up their ceremonies one wrong move, and you're on snake-feeding duty for life. The mainstream historical fact is that in 16th century Benin, python priests were key figures in Edo society, overseeing rituals in temples dedicated to Olokun and advising artisans on spiritual matters to ensure their work pleased the gods. Their influence extended to the Oba's court. A quirky tidbit, priests sometimes claimed they could read a python's movements to predict a casting's success, like a scaly fortune teller. Historians still argue whether these priests held real power over the guilds, or were mostly symbolic, their authority propped up by royal backing. You reach the temple, its clay walls etched with serpent coils, and duck inside. The air is damp, smelling of earth and incense, and a priest in a white wrapper tends a python coiled on an altar. His eyes meet yours, and he smirks. "Watch the snake." "Not me, it knows your secrets." You laugh, but his calm certainty makes you glance at the python, its tongue flicking lazily. He pours palm wine into a clay bowl, chanting softly, and you notice other casters kneeling nearby, their heads bowed. The priest's role is clear. He blesses the wax and the molds, even the tools you saw earlier, ensuring Olukun's favor. A young apprentice whispers that a priest once saved a failed poor by stroking a python's scales, wild right. The temple's quiet hum mixed with the rustle of snakes pulls you into a soothing rhythm, like a fan's soft whir back home tying you to the sacred world. You leave the temple behind the priest's chants, fading as you step back into the bustling streets of Benin's capital. The air now tinged with the scent of dust and distant marketplaces. You're tracing the paths where bronze goods travel, carried by traders across West Africa's sprawling trade routes. The sun beats down, and you dodge a caravan of donkeys laden with goods, their bells jingling softly. Somewhere nearby, a python slithers through the grass, a reminder of Olukun's presence, even here. These routes aren't just for profit. They carry the caster's sacred work to distant lands, spreading Benin's glory. You wouldn't survive a day hauling bronze in this heat. Trust me, your back would quit before noon. The mainstream historical fact is that by the 16th century, the Kingdom of Benin was a key player in West African trade networks, exporting bronze plaques and sculptures alongside ivory and pepper to neighboring regions like the Yoruba states and beyond. A quirky tidbit: traders sometimes carried tiny bronze python charms, believing they protected caravans from bandits. Imagine a snake-shaped lucky keychain. Historians still argue whether Benin's bronze trade was primarily economic or a way to extend the Oba's cultural influence, like a shiny PR campaign. You pause by a market stall, its wooden table groaning under bronze figurines and clay pots. A trader, his wrapper bright with dye haggles, with a merchant from Ife, gesturing at a plaque etched with python coils. The air smells of roasted maize and sweat, and you notice a small shrine nearby, where a python lounges, eyeing the crowd like a bored security guard. A trader jokes, "No charm, no sale. Olukun's watching." You chuckle, but his quick glance at the snake makes you wonder. The bronze goods, like those palace plaques you saw, are prized for their craftsmanship, fetching high prices in gold or salt. You watch a caravan head north, dust trailing behind, and imagine the plaques reaching distant courts, each one carrying Benin's story. The market's hum voices bells, and the python's faint rustle wraps you in a slow, soothing rhythm, like a fan's whir, back home pulling you deeper into this connected world. You turn your thoughts from trade routes to the deeper roots of python worship. Standing at the edge of the market, the dust from a departing caravan still settling. The air carries the faint scent of palm wine and sun-baked earth, and you spot a python gliding through the grass nearby, its scales catching the fading light. You're diving into the ancient myths that birthed this reverence for python stories, whispered long before the bronze plaques you saw in the palace. These tales aren't just bedtime stories. They're the foundation of Benin's spiritual world, tying the caster's work to the divine. You wouldn't survive a day debating theology with a python priest. They'd outtalk you faster than you can say Olukun. The mainstream historical fact is that python worship in the Kingdom of Benin, flourishing by the 13th century, likely stemmed from Edo animist beliefs, with pythons seen as earthly links to Olukun, the sea god, embodying creation and prosperity. A quirky tidbit: one myth claims the first python emerged from a river, carrying a bronze lump in its mouth as a gift from Olukun. Try selling that origin story to a museum curator. Historians still argue whether these myths were purely local or shaped by contact with Yoruba or Igbo cultures who also revered snakes. You sit on a woven mat near a storyteller's hut, the air cool under a palm tree's shade. The storyteller, his voice soft as a breeze, describes a python coiling around the world's first tree, guarding the waters of life. You smirk. Imagine a snake as the ultimate environmentalist. He pauses, tossing a cola nut to a nearby shrine, and says, "Mock the python and your crops dry up." You laugh, but the villagers' nods make you rethink it. The myth unfolds. Olokun sent pythons to guide the Edo people to fertile lands, their coils marking sacred rivers. You glance at the python nearby, its tongue flicking, and wonder if it's judging your skepticism. The story's rhythm, mixed with the hum of distant drums, feels like a fan's soft whir back home, pulling you into a world where every snake carries a spark of the divine. You return to the workshop, the storyteller's myths still echoing as you step into the smoky air, the python curled near the shrine blinking slowly. Now you're diving into the guild's inner workings, a rigid hierarchy that keeps this craft exclusive and sacred. The casters aren't just artisans, they're part of a structured society where rank dictates everything from who pours the bronze to who sweeps the floor. You wouldn't survive a day trying to climb their ladder. One misstep, and you're fetching water for the apprentices. The mainstream historical fact is that in 16th century Benin, the bronze casting guilds were tightly organized with a hierarchy of master casters, journeymen, and apprentices restricted to specific Edo families to preserve secrecy and tradition. A quirky tidbit: new apprentices had to prove their loyalty by sleeping near a python shrine for a night, imagine that, as your initiation test. Historians still argue whether this hierarchy was purely merit-based or reinforced by royal decrees to control the craft's prestige. You watch a master caster, his wrapper tied tightly, bark orders at a nervous apprentice, shaping a wax model. The master's hands, scarred from years at the forge, move with authority, correcting the boy's clumsy cuts. The air smells of sweat and molten metal, and you notice a senior journeyman nearby, polishing a plaque with python motifs. He smirks at the apprentice, slow hand, slow rank. Olokun's watching. You chuckle, but the apprentice's flushed face says he feels the pressure. The guild's ranks are clear masters, oversee the sacred pours, journeymen carve designs, and apprentices haul clay or fan furnaces. A small altar adorned with feathers and kola nuts sits by the forge, a nod to Olokun's oversight. You catch the master glancing at the python as if seeking its approval. The workshop's rhythm clinks chants, and the python's faint rustle feels like a fan's hum back home, pulling you deeper into this ordered, sacred world. The gleam of bronze plaques stacked near the forge catches your eye, their python motifs shimmering like they hold secrets beyond art. These aren't just decorations for the Oba's palace. They're a form of wealth, a currency of power in the kingdom. You watch a caster wrap a plaque carefully in cloth, as if it's worth more than gold. You wouldn't survive a day trying to haggle over one of these, mess up the deal, and you're out of favor with the Oba himself. The mainstream historical fact is that in 16th century Benin, bronze plaques and sculptures served as a form of royal currency gifted by the Oba to loyal chiefs or traded to symbolize alliances, reinforcing the kingdom's economic and political clout. A quirky tidbit: some plaques were so valuable that thieves risked execution just to steal one, believing a python's curse would spare them good luck with that plan. Historians still argue whether these bronzes were primarily economic tools or symbolic displays of the Oba's divine authority, meant to awe rather than circulate. You step closer, the air heavy with the scent of cooling metal and palm oil, and watch a caster polish a plaque showing a python coiled around a scepter. A court official draped in coral beads inspects it, nodding approval. You can't help but smirk. Imagine using a bronze snake picture as cash at your local market. The official mutters, "Lose this," and Olokun counts your days. You laugh, but his stern glance at the shrine python makes you swallow hard. The plaques are stored in a guarded hut, their value tied to the king's favor and the guild's skill. You notice an apprentice whispering about a chief who traded a plaque for a herd of cattle, big money in those days. The forge's heat lingers on your skin, but the rhythm of the caster's work, polishing, chanting, rapping, feels like a fan's soft hum back home, pulling you deeper into a world where bronze is both art and power. You follow a group of casters away from the forge, their tools tucked under their arms as you head toward a python temple in the capital's heart. The evening air is cooler, laced with the scent of damp earth and distant cook fires, and the faint rustle of a python cuts through the twilight. Tonight, you're witnessing the intricate rituals honoring these snakes, ceremonies that tie the caster's work to Olokun's divine favor. You wouldn't survive a day fumbling these offerings one wrong move, and you're scrubbing temple floors till dawn. The mainstream historical fact is that in 16th century Benin python rituals were elaborate affairs with priests and casters offering palm wine cola nuts and chants to honor Olokun, ensuring spiritual protection for their craft and the kingdom. A quirky tidbit. Some rituals involved draping pythons with tiny bronze beads believed to amplify their divine connection. Imagine bedazzling a snake for good luck. Historians still argue whether these ceremonies were purely devotional or also served to reinforce guild loyalty, binding casters to the Oba's authority. You step into the temple, its clay walls cool against the evening heat, and the air smells of incense and fermented palm wine. A priest. His white wrapper, glowing in the torchlight, arranges cola nuts on an altar where a python coils its scales, glinting like the plaques you saw. He chants softly, and you smirk. Imagine your co-workers praying to a pet snake before a big project. A caster nearby whispers, "Skip the offering," and your bronze cracks. You chuckle, but his glance at the python shuts you up fast. The ritual unfolds. Priests pour libations, casters bow, and the python slithers across the altar as if inspecting the gifts. You notice a small bronze figurine, a python curled around a staff, placed among the offerings and nod to the workshop's art. The chants grow softer, blending with the rustle of snakes and the flicker of torches, pulling you into a soothing rhythm, like a fan's hum back home, anchoring you in this sacred moment. You step out of the temple as the torches flicker low, the chants trailing off into the night like a fading whisper. The scent of incense clings to your wrapper as you follow a caster back through the dimly lit paths, his footsteps soft on the packed earth. The moon hangs high, casting silvery light on thatched roofs, and you hear the distant hoot of an owl blending with the rustle of leaves. You're heading to his home now, a modest compound where tradition seeps into every corner like the roots of an ancient tree. There's probably a python waiting in a family shrine, just like the workshop's scaly guest. You wouldn't survive a day in this household. Balancing forge duties with family rituals sounds exhausting, like trying to juggle while half asleep. The compound comes into view, a cluster of mud brick huts, encircled by a low fence of woven palm fronds. You duck under a doorway draped with beads, the air inside thick with the aroma of stewing yams and groundnut soup bubbling over a small fire. The caster's wife, her hands dusted with cassava flour, stirs the pot with a wooden spoon, her movements slow and rhythmic, like she's conducting a quiet symphony. Children scamper about their laughter, soft in the dim light of oil lamps, and you spot an elder sitting on a mat, weaving a basket while humming an old tune. This is the heartbeat of a caster's family life, where the sacred craft spills over into daily routines, blending work faith and kinship. You settle on a stool near the fire, its warmth prickling your skin, and watch the caster greet his family with a nod and a murmured blessing to Olokun. The mainstream historical fact is that in 16th century Benin, bronze casters' families were deeply integrated into the guild system, with wives and children often assisting in non-sacred tasks like preparing clay or tending shrines, maintaining the tradition across generations. A quirky tidbit, some families kept a house python as a pet trained to catch rats, but revered as a mini guardian. Imagine your cat doubling as a holy relic. Historians still argue whether these family dynamics empowered women in subtle ways or reinforced patriarchal structures given the guild's male dominance. The wife offers you a calabash of palm wine, its tartness cutting through the smoky air, and you sip, slowly feeling the day's heat finally ebb away. She jokes drink too much, and the python thinks you're an offering. You chuckle, but her glance at the small shrine in the corner, where a python dozes scales, glinting like bronze, makes you sip more carefully. The children gather around wide-eyed as the caster recounts a day at the forge, his voice low and steady, describing a perfect pour blessed by Olokun. One boy, no older than 10, mimics carving wax with a stick, his tongue poking out in concentration. It's a scene of quiet continuity, where stories of pythons and plaques are bedtime tales passed down like heirlooms. You notice the walls adorned with small bronze tokens, miniature pythons and staffs reminders of the family's craft. The elder pauses his weaving to tell a story of his own apprenticeship, his wrinkled hands gesturing as he describes a python that chose him by slithering onto his lap during a ritual. You smirk. Sounds like a scaly game of musical chairs. The family laughs softly, the sound mingling with the crackle of the fire, and you feel yourself sinking into the mat, the rhythm of their chatters like a lullaby. The wife kneads dough for tomorrow's bread, her hands strong from years of helping, mix clay for molds, and you realize how intertwined everything is. The forge's fire echoes in this hearth, Olokun's presence in every corner. As the night deepens, the children curl up on mats, their breathing slowing, and the caster lights a small incense stick at the shrine, whispering thanks for the day's work. The python stirs slightly, its tongue flicking, and you wonder if it's dreaming of river depths or palace walls. You're tempted to ask about guild secrets, but the elder winks. Some things stay with the snakes. Another gentle joke, but it lands with the weight of tradition. The air grows heavier with sleep, the fire's embers glowing softly, and you're wrapped in this world of family and faith, where bronze casters aren't just artisans, they're stewards of a legacy that slithers through every generation. You stir slightly on the mat, the embers casting a warm, fading glow where shadows dance like lazy pythons on the walls. The family's breathing has settled into a soft rhythmic hum, and you feel the pull of sleep, but your mind wanders back to those bronze tokens, their python designs, whispering stories from long ago. You're drifting through time now, tracking how these snake images have evolved in Benin's bronzes, from crude early forms to the intricate masterpieces that adorn the palace. The air feels thicker with history, like flipping through an old photo album where every picture shows a snake getting fancier. You wouldn't survive a day, as a time-traveling art critic here, spot the wrong evolution, and the casters might think you're cursed. You imagine yourself back in the 13th century, when Benin's bronze tradition was just taking root, the early plaques rougher, with pythons depicted as simple coils, more symbol than detail. The mainstream historical fact is that python imagery in Benin bronzes evolved from basic abstract forms in the 13th century to highly detailed realistic representations by the 16th century, reflecting advances in casting techniques and deepening ties to Olokun worship. A quirky tidbit: Early casters sometimes etched pythons with mismatched scales, believing uneven patterns warded off evil spirits, like giving your art a deliberate flaw to keep the gods humble. Historians still argue whether this evolution was driven by internal innovation or external influences such as trade with European merchants who brought new tools in the late 15th century. You shift your position, the mat crinkling softly under you, and picture the progression in those initial years. A python might be a mere wavy line on a small bell, its head a blob symbolizing protection without much flair. Fast forward a century, and you're seeing fuller bodies, tongues flicking out eyes dotted with intent. The air in your mind's eye smells of fresh clay and wood smoke, much like the workshop you left earlier, where casters experimented with wax to capture a snake's glide. You smirk, imagine a medieval caster high-fiving over finally nailing a realistic coil, only to have the mold crack. Olukun's picky tonight, one might joke, and you'd nod along, hoping the python shrine agrees. By the 15th century, the imagery blooms. Pythons wrap around royal staffs on plaques, their scales textured like tiny beads, each one hammered with care. You're wandering through an imagined gallery of these bronzes, the metal cool under your fingertips, and you notice how the snakes start interacting with human figures, coiling around warriors' legs or crowning kings' heads. It's like the pythons are climbing the social ladder right along with the kingdom. The sensory details pull you in the faint tang of oxidized bronze, the way light plays off the curves, making the snakes seem alive, ready to slither off the plaque. You hear the distant echo of hammers from centuries past, a steady tap-tap that lulls you like rain on a tin roof back home. You pause at a 16th century masterpiece, perhaps one of those palace plaques you admired, where the python is hyper-detailed muscles rippling under scales, eyes fierce yet serene, embodying Olukun's dual nature of calm seas and hidden depths. The evolution is clear. What started as a basic guardian symbol has become a narrative element, telling stories of creation myths or royal protection. You can't help but chuckle softly. Think of it as pythons getting a glow-up over the years from sketchy doodles to full-on supermodel status in bronze. A caster from back then might quip add more scales, or the snake complains, and you'd laugh, but deep down, you sense the reverence the way each advancement honored the divine. As the centuries tick by into the 17th, the imagery refines further. Pythons entwine with other motifs like leopards, or birds creating complex scenes that blend spirituality with politics. You're tracing this with your mind's eye. The family snores a gentle background, and it feels like unrolling a scroll where snakes grow bolder, their forms adapting to new influences, maybe a touch of Portuguese style, from traders adding flair to the coils. The quirky imperfections don't fade, replaced by precision, but always with that sacred touch. You feel the weight of time, how these bronzes survived raids, and changes their python images, a constant thread. You yawn the embers now mere specks, and reflect on how this evolution mirrors the kingdom's own growth, from a budding power to a bronze empire. The pythons in art become more than symbols. They're storytellers slithering through history with grace. Another light joke bubbles up. If pythons could talk, they'd probably say, "Thanks for the upgrade, we were getting tired of looking like noodles." The scholarly debates swirl gently in your thoughts, but they don't disrupt the calm. Instead, they add layers like the scales on those evolving bronzes. You're sinking deeper into the mat, the night air cool on your skin, wrapped in this timeless journey where art and faith coil together eternally. You blink slowly in the dim light, the night air heavy with the scent of cooling embers and distant rain, as your thoughts shift from the evolving python art to the force that drove its creation, the Oba himself. You're imagining yourself in the grand halls of the palace now, where the air smells of polished coral and incense, and the king's voice echoes like a gentle command. The bronze works, you've seen those plaques with their intricate snakes, don't just appear. They're born from royal whims, commissioned to capture the kingdom's essence. They're all thanks to the Oba's patronage, his nod turning casters' sweat into eternal legacy. You wouldn't survive a day pitching ideas to a king's stutter once, and you're demoted to polishing his throne. You picture the Oba, seated on a carved ivory stool, surrounded by courtiers in flowing wrappers, as he summons the guildmaster. The mainstream historical fact is that Benin's Obas from the 13th century onward actively patronized bronze casting by commissioning large-scale works like plaques and bells, using them to document their reigns and glorify the dynasty. These commissions were funded through the kingdom's wealth from trade and tribute. A quirky tidbit, Obas sometimes requested personal touches, like adding a favorite python's exact scale pattern to a plaque, treating it like a custom tattoo for the palace. Historians still argue whether this patronage was purely artistic or a calculated tool for propaganda immortalizing the Oba's power to deter rivals. The guildmaster bows low, his hands clasped, and you're there in the shadows, watching as the Oba describes his vision, a massive plaque depicting a victory procession with pythons guarding the flanks. The air hums with quiet anticipation, the scent of fresh palm wine from a nearby calabash wafting over. You smirk, imagine being the king and saying, "Make it bigger, or I'll feed you to the snakes." But his tone is measured, almost soothing, as he sketches rough ideas on a clay tablet. Courtiers nod along their beads, clinking softly, and you feel the weight of expectation. This isn't just art, it's a royal decree binding the casters to weeks of labor. The Oba's patronage keeps the guilds thriving, supplying them with copper and tin from distant trades like those routes you traced earlier. You wander the palace corridors, in your mind, the walls alive with commissioned bronzes, each one a testament to an Oba's era. One plaque shows an enthronement pythons coiled at the base like loyal dogs. Another captures a festival, snakes weaving through dancers' feet. The casters back at the forge would scramble to meet deadlines, their chants invoking Olokun for flawless pours. You chuckle softly, think of it as the world's oldest art commission, where payment is in prestige and maybe a sack of cowries. A court scribe records the order, his quill scratching on parchment, and you notice the Oba's eyes light up at the promise of immortality in metal. It's a partnership. The king provides vision, and resources the casters deliver divine craft. As the meeting wraps, the guildmaster retreats with sketches in hand, and you follow him out into the courtyard where moonlight glints off existing plaques. The Oba's influence ripples through every bronze, from small altars to grand bells rung during ceremonies. You recall the rituals you witnessed, how the king's honor for pythons inspires the motifs his commissions often demand: more snakes, more coils to emphasize his link to Olokun. The air feels charged with legacy, like each plaque is a chapter in a never-ending book. You yawn the family snores, a distant lullaby, and ponder how without royal backing, the art might have faded like a forgotten myth. Another light joke: if Obas had Yelp reviews, the casters would rate them 5 stars for demanding but divine. The patronage extends beyond plaques. Obas commission head sculptures for ancestral altars, pythons etched on the bases as eternal guardians. You're envisioning a caster presenting a finished piece, the Oba inspecting it closely, his fingers tracing the scales. Approval means feasting, rejection, rework under the stars. It's a cycle of creation fueled by kingly ambition, ensuring Benin's bronzes outlast empires. The scholarly debates swirl gently. Was it vanity or strategy? Either way, you're immersed in this royal dance where patronage turns molten dreams into solid history. The night deepens, pulling you toward sleep, the python motifs from centuries past slithering through your thoughts like gentle waves. You're pulling back to the workshop's gritty heart, the guarded mysteries lying in the air thick with secrecy, the scent of wax and clay mingling with the faint earthy musk of a python shrine tucked in the corner. You're uncovering the hidden techniques of these casters, knowledge whispered from father to son, master to apprentice like a family recipe no outsider ever tastes. Those bone knives and wooden spatulas are just the surface. The true secrets are in the subtle mixes, the timed pours, the incantations that make bronze bend to will. You wouldn't survive a day prying into these, ask too many questions, and you're politely shown the door, or worse-eyed by that ever-present python as if you're the next offering. You're crouched in the dim glow of the forge now, watching a master caster mix his special clay slurry, his hands moving with the precision of a dancer who's rehearsed a lifetime. The mainstream historical fact is that Benin's bronze casters guarded proprietary techniques such as unique alloy ratios of copper, tin, and lead developed over generations in the 16th century, which gave their works exceptional durability and sheen. These methods were orally transmitted, ensuring the guild's monopoly. A quirky tidbit, casters sometimes added ground python bones to the alloy, believing it infused the metal with Olukun's resilience. Imagine sneaking that ingredient past a modern lab inspector. Historians still argue whether these secrets were entirely indigenous or subtly enhanced by trade secrets from Arab or European merchants who visited Benin's ports. The master dips a ladle into a bubbling crucible, the heat waving like a mirage, and you lean in, feeling the prickles on your skin. He mutters under his breath a chant to Olokun, but woven in are hints of the technique, a pinch of secret ash from sacred trees, stirred counterclockwise, 7 times no more, no less. You smirk, sounds like a witch's brew, but in this world, it's science wrapped in faith. An apprentice nearby fumbles a tool, and the master snaps, watch the count, or the snake counts your mistakes. You chuckle softly, but the boy's wide eyes remind you it's no idle threat. Precision is survival here. The hidden knowledge includes firing temperatures gauged by the color of flames, red like a sunset for wax, melting white hot for bronze, and molds, layered with just the right thickness of clay to avoid cracks. You're tempted to jot notes, but in this era, literacy's for scribes. Casters commit it all to memory, a mental vault, locked tighter than the Oba's treasury. You shift your position the ground hard under your sandals and watch as the caster tests a wax model by pricking it with a thorn, checking for bubbles that could ruin the pour. The secrets extend to the wax itself, blended with beeswax from specific hives, tempered with oils from python fat. Yes, really, to make it pliable yet firm. It's a delicate balance, like baking bread in a furnace. Too soft and it melts away, too hard and details blur. You recall the evolving python art, how those intricate scales demanded finer techniques over time. The caster's lore includes remedies for failures. If a mold shatters, bury the pieces under a python shrine and fast for a day. Quirky, sure, but it keeps the spirits and the guild appeased. The air hums with the forge's breath, and you notice an elder caster in the shadows, his eyes sharp despite his age, whispering corrections to the master. This is the chain knowledge, passed in hushed tones during moonless nights away from prying ears. You inhale the smoky tang, your wrapper sticking slightly, and ponder the alloy's alchemy. The hidden ratios, perhaps 88 parts copper to 10 tin and 2 lead, create that golden hue, unique to Benin bronzes, resistant to corrosion, even in humid coasts. Casters test it by dropping a bead into water. If it sings a certain pitch, it's ready. You grin acoustic metallurgy. Who knew, but don't laugh too loud. An apprentice once mocked it and ended up with warped plaques for weeks. The techniques include lost wax refinements, multiple layers of clay, each dried slowly under palm shades to prevent warping. You're seeing it unfold the wax sculpted with heated knives, details etched using porcupine quills for fine lines. The python motifs, those coiling guardians, require special care scales incised with a twist to catch light, making them seem to move. It's art engineering and mysticism rolled into one, guarded jealously to maintain the kingdom's edge. As the pour begins, the molten bronze glowing like liquid sunset, you feel the tension, one wrong tilt, and the secrets wasted. The master's hand steady, guided by generations' whispers. Hidden knowledge also covers repairs, cracks filled with a paste of ground bronze and python venom baked to seal. Wild right, but it works, blending seamlessly. Historians debate the origins. Did Ife artisans share basics, or did Benin innovate alone? Either way, these secrets elevated the craft to divine levels. You watch the cooling steam rising like spirits, and an apprentice polishes with a soft cloth infused with herbal oils. The final sheen, a rub with python skin for luck. You chuckle spa treatment for metal. The elder nods approval, his voice a murmur. Remember, the snake holds the fire's secret. It's a reminder that Olukun's favor is the ultimate technique, tying faith to every hidden step. The secrets linger in your mind as the night air stirs with a new energy, drums thumping in the distance, pulling you toward the heart of Benin's capital. The streets come alive as you join a growing crowd, rappers swirling in vibrant colors under the moon's soft gaze, and the scent of roasted plantains mixes with incense wafting from portable shrines. You're stepping into one of the Python festivals, now grand celebrations that honor the sacred snakes, and Olokun turning the city into a tapestry of dance chant and reverence. Those quiet temple offerings pale in comparison to this spectacle where casters and commoners alike pay homage to the coiled guardians. You wouldn't survive a day dancing through this without tripping over your own feet, or worse, stepping on a holy python, slithering freely. The crowd thickens. Torches flickering like stars fall into earth, and you weave through groups of revelers, their faces painted with white clay dots, symbolizing Olukun's waves. The mainstream historical fact is that Python festivals in 16th century Benin were major annual events organized by the Oba and priests to honor Olokun, featuring parades, dances, and offerings that reinforced community bonds and the kingdom's spiritual unity. These gatherings drew thousands, blending worship with social merriment. A quirky tidbit, participants sometimes carried live pythons draped over their shoulders like living scarves, believing close contact brought personal blessings. Imagine accessorizing with a snake that could decide to nap on your head. Historians still argue whether these festivals were primarily religious observances or clever political tools used by the Oba to display wealth and maintain loyalty amid growing trade influences. You're swept into the main square, where drummers pound out rhythms on talking drums, their beats mimicking the slither of pythons through grass. The air pulses with energy, but it's not chaotic. There's a slow, hypnotic flow to it, all like a river winding lazily. You spot casters from the workshop. Their usual sweaty wrappers, traded for festive ones, embroidered with bronze beads, joining a line of dancers who sway in circles, mimicking the coils of sacred snakes. A priest leads the procession, holding aloft a massive python, bigger than any you've seen, its scales glistening under oil rubbed for the occasion. He chants praises to Olokun, his voice rising and falling like waves, and the crowd echoes back their words, blending into a soothing hum. You can't help but join the sway, your hips moving tentatively, and a nearby woman laughs gently. Move like the snake, or it thinks you're prey. You grin, but her wink suggests she's half serious, better to blend in than stand out here. The festival's grandeur unfolds stalls, line the edges, offering cola nuts, palm wine, and small bronze charms etched with python motifs like those evolving designs you pondered. Vendors hawk them with calls of Olakun's favor for a cowrie, and you're tempted to buy one, feeling its cool weight in your palm as protection against the night's spirits. In the center, a raised platform hosts storytellers, their voices weaving tales of pythons, saving the kingdom from floods, or guiding lost traders home. Children cluster at their feet, wide-eyed, while elders nod along passing calabashes of fermented drink. You sip from one offered to you, the tartness warming your throat, and watch as dancers form human chains, twisting like a giant serpent through the square. The pythons themselves are the stars released from shrines to roam freely, slithering between legs without a single bite, as if Olokun commands their calm. You freeze as one brushes your ankle, its touch surprisingly smooth, like silk dragged over sand. Torchlight casts long shadows, making the scene feel eternal, a blend of joy and solemnity that lulls you deeper into the rhythm. Priests scatter offerings, eggs, milk, and fruits into baskets carried by apprentices who parade them to a central altar piled high with bronze sculptures of coiled snakes commissioned by the Oba himself. You recall the royal patronage, how these festivals showcase those grand works, the plaques gleaming under firelight as symbols of divine approval. A group of casters performs a mock casting ritual, pouring water instead of bronze into molds shaped like pythons, drawing cheers from the crowd. It's theatrical, but rooted in their daily grind, a way to share the craft without spilling secrets. You chuckle, imagine a Broadway show about metallurgy complete with snake props. But here, it's genuine, tying the guild's hidden knowledge to public praise. As the night deepens, the dance is slow, bodies glistening with sweat under the stars, and you find a spot to sit against a palm tree, the ground vibrating with lingering drum beats. Women in elaborate headdresses twirl fans made of python skin, shed naturally, of course, creating breezes that carry the scent of blooming flowers. The Oba appears on a balcony overlooking the square, his silhouette regal, waving a staff topped with a bronze python head. The crowd quiets for his blessing, his words praising Olokun for bountiful seas and strong bronzes, and you feel the collective sigh of contentment. It's a moment of unity, where casters rub shoulders with farmers, all under the snake's watchful gaze. A young dancer spins too fast nearby, nearly toppling into you, and apologizes with a bow. The python made me dizzy. Another light joke, easing the reverence with humor as festivals should. You're starting to feel the pull of exhaustion, the festival's energy winding down like a snake retreating to its burrow. Bonfires crackle, casting golden hues on faces lost in song, and pythons are gently gathered back to shrines, their handlers whispering thanks. The grandeur isn't in spectacle alone. It's in the shared faith, the way these events honor the sacred while celebrating life. You think back to the myths you uncovered, how pythons birthed from rivers inspire these nights, evolving from ancient tales to living traditions. The scholarly debates fade in your mind, religious or political, as the reality envelops you. It's both and more a cultural heartbeat. The air cools further stars, twinkling like distant bronze specks, and you're wrapped in this vibrant yet soothing world, where festivals bridge the divine and the daily. The drum beats soften to a distant pulse, like a heartbeat slowing for sleep, as the night air carries whispers of change on the wind. The pythons are ushered back to their shrines, their scales catching the last flickers of torchlight, and you feel a subtle shift, like the kingdom's vibrant rhythm is beginning to falter under unseen pressures. You're witnessing the slow creep of colonial impacts, now shadows from distant lands stretching across Benin's bronze traditions, dimming the forges that once burned brightly. The festivals like this one, grand and unifying, start to feel more fragile as European traders and later invaders bring not just goods, but forces that erode the sacred craft. You wouldn't survive a day navigating these changes, adapt too slowly, and your world unravels like a poorly tied wrapper. The air grows heavier, with the scent of sea salt from incoming ships, and you're standing at the port of Ugoton, where Portuguese merchants first docked in the late 15th century, their sails billowing like intrusive ghosts. At first, it's trade bronze manillas, those ring-shaped currencies exchanged for pepper and ivory, but soon the dynamics twist. You watch casters adapt incorporating European copper into their alloys, but the influx brings competition and control. The mainstream historical fact is that colonial incursions, starting with Portuguese contact in 1485 and escalating with British forces in the 19th century, disrupted Benin's bronze casting by looting artifacts and imposing trade restrictions, culminating in the 1897 punitive expedition that sacked the palace. A quirky tidbit. Some casters hid small python charms in exported bronzes, hoping Olokun would curse any foreign thief. Imagine a snake's revenge delivered via ocean mail. Historians still argue whether the decline was primarily due to economic exploitation or cultural suppression, with some claiming internal conflicts played a larger role. You wander back toward the capital, the path lit by sporadic lanterns, and notice fewer apprentices in the workshops, their numbers dwindling as young ones are drawn to new trades peddled by outsiders. The forges, once roaring daily, sputter intermittently, the air less smoky, more subdued. A caster you recognize from earlier festivals polishes a plaque with half-hearted strokes, his eyes distant, and you overhear him mutter about white ghosts demanding our snake's secrets. You smirk, picture trying to explain python worship to a stiff-collared trader. They'd probably think it's a pet store gone wrong. But the joke fades as you see the impact guilds fracturing secrets leaking or lost as sons are conscripted into labor for colonial ports. The Oba's commissions dwindle the palace walls, stripped bare after raids, those gleaming plaques carted off to foreign museums like stolen memories. You pause at a half-abandoned shrine where a lone python coils listlessly, its offerings meager a few wilted leaves instead of fresh cola nuts. The colonial grip tightens in the 1800s British demands for palm oil and rubber sidelining bronze work, turning artisans into farmers or porters. You feel the weight of it, like a humid blanket smothering the fire's spirit. Festivals shrink, once vibrant parades, reduced to quiet gatherings, pythons honored in whispers to avoid missionary scorn. A priest nearby tends the snake with trembling hands, joking softly, Olukun's hiding from the pale and smart god. You chuckle, but it's tinged with sadness. The humor masks the erosion of traditions that once defined this land, the caster's hidden techniques. Those guarded mixes and chants face threats from enforced modernization, where European smelting methods are pushed as superior, diluting the sacred essence. You're drawn to a memory of the 1897 sack, though its future from this vantage the air thick with foreboding, as you envision British troops storming the palace flames, licking the thatched roofs, while bronzes are pried from walls. Thousands of plaques and sculptures vanish overseas, the kingdom's soul scattered like seeds in foreign soil. You stand amid imagined rubble, the scent of ash replacing incense, and watch survivors salvage what they can broken molds, scattered tools rebuilding in secrecy. The decline isn't sudden, it's a slow bleed. Colonial taxes draining resources, young casters migrating to coastal factories for wage work. You spot an elder teaching a handful of boys the lost wax method. By moonlight, his voice will whisper to evade patrols. Keep the python's coil in your heart, he say, and you nod, feeling the resilience amid the fade. The quirky charms and myths persist underground casters, embedding subtle protests in their remaining works. Perhaps a python motif with defiant eyes symbolizing resistance. But the festivals you loved, they morph into subdued rituals, drums, muffled dances, restrained under watchful colonial eyes. You yawn the night's exhaustion, mirroring the tradition's weariness, and ponder how trade routes once lifelines become chains. European guns and goods flood in outshining local bronze, and guilds splinter as families prioritize survival over craft. A light joke from a young caster breaks the tension. Now we cast shadows instead of metal, cheaper at least. It lands softly, a spark of humor in the dimming light, reminding you that spirit endures, even as practices wane. You're sinking into the ground's embrace now, the stars above, like distant Olokun's eyes, witnessing the shift. Missionaries preach against pagan snakes, converting some casters who melt down shrines for scrap, but others cling hiding pythons in homes like forbidden pets. The scholarly debates echo faintly. Was it outright destruction or a forced evolution, with some techniques surviving in hybrid forms? Either way, the bronze-casting heart beats slower, its rhythm altered by colonial winds. You feel the pull towards sleep, the air cooler, the pythons rustle, a faint farewell to an era. The traditions decline, but whispers of revival linger, like embers waiting for breath. You emerge from the haze of colonial shadows, the echoes of fading festivals, and looted palaces dissolving like mist in the morning sun as you blink into the bright light of modern times, where Benin's bronzes still whisper their ancient stories across the globe. The air feels different now, crisp with air conditioning in museum halls, or humid in Nigerian galleries, and you're standing in a contemporary exhibition space surrounded by glass cases that hold those shimmering plaques, their python motifs as vivid as ever. The legacy lives on not just in metal, but in the ongoing saga of cultural revival and restitution, where these artifacts bridge centuries like timeless serpents. You wouldn't survive a day as a museum curator dealing with repatriation paperwork, too many emails, not enough palm wine. You gaze at a plaque depicting a coiled python, its scales catching the LED lights, and reflect on how these bronzes have endured wars, thefts, and in time itself. The mainstream historical fact is that today, thousands of Benin bronzes reside in museums worldwide, with significant repatriation efforts accelerating since the 2020s, including Germany's return of artifacts in 2022 and ongoing commitments from institutions like the British Museum. But here's a quirky tidbit. Some modern Nigerian artists create replica bronzes using 3D printing, blending ancient lost wax techniques, and with tech to sell as souvenirs. Imagine Olokun approving a laser-scanned snake. Historians still argue whether full repatriation to Nigeria will revitalize local traditions, or if shared international custody better preserves them for global education. You wander through the exhibit, your footsteps echoing softly on polished floors, and notice visitors snapping photos with their phones, the flashes mimicking the forge's old glow. In 2025, the momentum builds. Nigeria's National Commission for Museums and Monuments oversees returns with over 1,000 bronzes repatriated by mid-year, including 119 from the Netherlands in June, celebrated in Abuja, with ceremonies echoing those ancient festivals you danced in. France's Senate voted unanimously on April 28th to streamline African artifact restitution, while the Museum of Fine Arts in Boston returned 2 masterpieces to the Oba on July 3rd, closing a chapter of colonial theft. You smirk, picture a python slithering through customs demanding its own passport. The bronzes aren't just relics. They're symbols of resilience, inspiring films, books, and even fashion lines, with snake motifs strutting down Lagos runways. You pause at a digital display, where interactive maps trace the bronze's journeys from Benin's palace to European auctions now looping back home. Nigerian museums like the one in Benin City are expanding with the planned Edo Museum of West African Art, set to house returnees funded by international partnerships. You imagine casters' descendants visiting, touching the metal their ancestors shaped, feeling Olokun's presence in the hum of climate-controlled rooms. A quirky revival street artist in Ueda paint murals of pythons wrapping around skyscrapers, blending old myths with urban vibes. Olokun goes graffiti. But the debate persists. Some scholars say repatriation empowers communities, while others worry about preservation in underfunded facilities suggesting digital replicas as a compromise. You step outside into the bustling streets of modern Benin City, the air alive with car horns and market calls, yet shrines to pythons still dot the landscape, tended by priests in jeans and t-shirts. The bronze's legacy fuels tourism, drawing visitors to festivals that mix traditional dances with live-streamed events. Pythons, honored via apps that track their well-being. Tech meets divinity. You chuckle, imagine a python with its own Instagram captioning, coiled in content #Olokun vibes. In classrooms worldwide, kids learn about the bronzes, sparking discussions on colonialism and justice, while Nigerian youth reclaim the craft, forging new pieces in community workshops that echo the guilds you knew. The endurance is profound. Despite the 1897 sacking that scattered them, the bronzes symbolize cultural sovereignty, with returns from countries like Germany, the Netherlands, and the US piling up by 2025. You feel a quiet pride, like watching an old friend thrive after hardship. Art fairs in Abuja showcase contemporary bronzes, artists experimenting with recycled metals, pythons now coiled around symbols of independence. A light joke: if Olokun had a business card, it'd read God of Seas and Comebacks. The scholarly tension lingers: repatriation versus preservation, but you're lost in the moment. The bronze's legacy, a living thread connecting past to present. As the sun dips below the horizon, casting a gentle bronze glow over Benin City, you feel the world soften, the hum of modern life fading like a distant drumbeat. The python motifs, those coiled guardians from centuries past, seem to curl around your thoughts, their scales shimmering in your mind's eye as you sink deeper into calm. You're no longer in the bustling streets or museum halls. You're floating somewhere timeless, where the air smells faintly of palm wine and earth, and the rustle of a sacred snake lulls you like a whispered lullaby. Each bronze plaque, each story of Olokun's grace, settles over you like a warm blanket, heavy with history, yet light with peace. You breathe slower now, the rhythm of your heart matching the gentle sway of a python gliding through grass, guiding you toward rest. Let the worries of the day slip away like wax melting from a mold, leaving only serenity. The stars above wink like Olokun's eyes, watching over you, whispering that all is well. Sleep comes softly, wrapping you in the embrace of an ancient, unbroken story.